Kings, Queens and Fairy Tales is a creative design to assess problems, have some fun, and begin the problem-solving process. We all know that identifying and dealing with team and organisational dysfunctions can be dicey business, particularly as most well-intentioned organisations are conflict-averse and will choose not to deal with issues until they become almost unbearable. Our experience is that unless an organisation is in the midst of a crisis, leaders will be reluctant to do anything differently. At this point, many leaders don't know what to do to get the issues on the table in a manner that doesn't increase tensions, embarrass critical players, or result in defensiveness. This design uses the power of storytelling to build trust and engagement to creatively uncover problems. It provides a means for looking at issues influencing trust in a safe and interesting manner in which risk is minimal if leaders have a sense of humour and curiosity about their own leadership. However, if they lack a sense of humour and a willingness to look at the issues blocking the maximum performance of the team or organisation, don't use this design. The assumption is that most people know such blockages exist and that when they are expressed in an open and humorous manner, it will provide relief, leading to a sense of optimism that change is possible. But, as in most situations in which serious change is needed, ownership of the issues is the essential first step before any positive actions can be expected. Kings, Queens and Fairy Tales provide such ownership without blame or shame. It is a diagnostic tool that opens the door to positive solutions. Step 1. The setup. The Kings, Queens and Fairy Tales design works best when you can schedule a half-day session, preferably at an off-site location. The design could be done in a large training room on site, but the off-site location is helpful for encouraging participants to be more willing to risk doing things differently because they're not in their usual work environment. Select a cross-section of up to 25 participants from different levels within the organisation. Supervisors and hourly paid associates, executives, managers, and direct reports. Divide the participants into 4 groups of 6 to 7 people. You can do this activity with a homogeneous group with similar roles and authority, but having a mixed group, as you will see, usually results in an exciting process with laughter, insight, and positive feelings. Here's a really top tip. Have 2 of the groups be people from the same level and 2 of the groups be mixed level personnel. Having groups of both mixed level and same level personnel will give you the best balance between participant risk and contrasting viewpoints. The resulting diagnostic stories will then reflect different issues that each group believes needs to be addressed. Make sure everyone has a notepad and pen and that there are 4 flip chart pads on easels, 1 for each of the 4 groups. You should also gather some props to support the out-of-the-box thinking that is sure to occur, such as funny hats or scarves, tools, or utensils. Include anything that might be helpful to get the groups to tell their stories and get into character. The point is that creativity and fun are encouraged. Step 2. The creative introduction. When the participants arrive, set the scene for the activity immediately. Acknowledge that this will be very different from what they were expecting or have perhaps ever been asked to do before. Tell the group that you are a wizard and it is essential that everyone follows your directions or you will cast a spell on the lot of them. Tell them that for this session they are all members of some kingdom, their organisation, and that there has been trouble brewing for some time. The king or queen, their CEO or organisational leader, has asked you to help bring the issues out so that they can be solved. They have ordered absolute honesty from this fine gathering they've chosen to help bring harmony back to the kingdom. Explain that the small groups will be tasked with creating stories to depict what life is like in their kingdom, so the king or queen can really understand the issues and then do something about them. It might also be useful to create some ground rules for the group, such as no judgment, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and the stories must be funny. It takes cooperation to build these stories, and the ground rules give people permission to act differently in a safe way. Here's another really top tip. As the facilitator, you might want to consider wearing a black cape so that you can really get into the role of the wizard and subconsciously give the participants permission to get into their roles. Divide them into the 4 groups and give them 1 hour to create a 15-minute story about the kingdom. Have them use the language and characters of King Arthur's Middle Ages to describe life in their kingdom and the problems that exist. Tell them that in those far-off days there were dragons and knights, wizards and princes, serfs and wenches, and they can let their imaginations go wild as they use these characters to describe the current state of their community. Show them the box of props you have prepared and tell them they can use whatever they want to help them tell their stories and get into character. Using the language of the times, they need to identify all the issues present that keep the current kingdom from being the best performing kingdom anywhere. Tell them they do not have to solve the issues, just present them in their stories so they can be solved later. Before they start on their stories, have the group spend 10 minutes writing down the unfinished business they think needs addressing. For example, there might be issues with power and authority, unclear roles, competition from rival organisations, or conflicts that people are unwilling to resolve. There might even have been a recent failure that encompasses multiple issues that they can draw from. Now have the groups begin thinking about what kinds of stories would represent the issues without having to fix them. This kind of thinking is a stretch for even the most creative participants, so give them some examples of things they might find to help start them off. A whole example story is also a good idea. Here's one really short example that we have drawn from recent world news. Once upon a time, in the kingdom of social mediana, the poor people were extremely upset at the king's decision to sell their personal details to the wicked prince. The king didn't think he was doing anything wrong when he made his decision, so he was very confused as to why his people were so upset. In an effort to make good, the king called in the Wizard of Spin to help figure out what should be done to make them all live happily ever after. Clearly, the issues must be understandable, important, and fixable. Tell them that in their stories, titles and people can be recognisable. Who the king or queen is, who the sorcerer is, or who is the pretender to the throne, but tell them not to use anyone's names. If the participants can figure out who people are by the stories, that's fine. Just don't directly name people. Encourage them to explore humour in their stories. And before the session, you may want to let the leader know that they might be the brunt of some honest humour, and how they handle it will be very important. You could also encourage the leader to tell the group that the group shouldn't hold back. If the leader can't handle the brutal truth that will be produced by this process, then don't use this design. Or, if the organisation is in the midst of a crisis and there is hostility, anger, and open antagonism, there are other designs that might prove useful, such as the future search. Step 3, the presentations. After their hour of design time, gather the groups together and have them present their 15-minute stories in turn. Remind the groups before they present that honesty rules and humour and exaggeration can be used to make their points. Introduce each group by saying, "Once upon a time in the kingdom of," whatever you named it, "there was some trouble, and things were not all they could be. Then encourage them to begin. At the end of each story, ask the other 3 groups observing to identify the issues that need addressing. As the facilitator, write each issue they offer down on a piece of flip chart paper, but allow no discussion yet. Don't worry too much about the time each group will take to present. We find that the presentations rarely last the full 15 minutes, but we set them up with this expectation to make sure they take the activity seriously. At the end of the 4 stories, ask the group whether there are significant differences in the stories or the issues coming from them. If so, explore with the group what these differences are. Step 4, the so what. Divide the participants into new groups by counting off by 5s. Give these new groups 30 minutes to agree on the top 3 issues that must be addressed if this kingdom is to be the best it can be. For each issue they decide on, they must provide an argument for their choice. Then get the whole group back together and take the number 1 issue and reason from each of the 5 groups. Capture each issue and reason as they are given on a piece of flip chart paper. If an issue is offered more than once, make a note on the paper to reflect this. Continue going around the group until you have everybody's top 3 in the prioritized list. This might also be a time to use the Las Vegas vote design as a means of establishing your prioritized list. The next step after this design will be to present the prioritized list to the king or queen, that is the CEO or managing director of the organization. A good way to do this is to select one person from each of the story groups to act as a steering committee and have them meet with the leader to present the list and develop a plan for next steps. The steering committee will be the ones that develop the detailed plan and present it, but make sure that the prioritized issues are agreed to by the whole group before you close out the session. Once the steering committee has presented the top 3 issues to the leader, you can also ask them to verbalize the issues back to the group so they know the leader has heard them as they were intended and agrees they need addressing. Scanning the other designs offered, the steering committee may also suggest a design for addressing one or more of the issues as well as a time frame. Here is a summary of the steps with the time needed for each. Step 1, the setup. Step 2, the creative bit. Step 3, the presentations. And Step 4, the so what. The total design takes 3 hours.